bienvenidos. Antes de comenzar, y a todos los espectadores y a los speakers, quiero darles brevemente unas indicaciones. Este evento está en formato webinario, por lo que pueden interactuar tanto en el chat como en el cuadro de Q&A. Todo el evento va a contar con traducción simultánea, el cual ya está activado. En la parte inferior derecha encontrarán un globo terráqueo con varias opciones. Pueden elegir mantener la herramienta apagada, por lo que van a escuchar el evento en su idioma original, o pueden elegir escuchar el evento completo, ya sea en inglés o en español. Les recomiendo que si lo van a utilizar, apaguen el idioma original, porque de lo contrario van a estar escuchando el idioma, a los ponentes y a la traducción. Por último, comentarles que si no les aparece el globo terráqueo es porque tienen una versión no actualizada de Zoom y es necesario que actualicen. Sin más preámbulo, quiero darle la palabra a Elena Toledo, coordinadora del proyecto de las 5 propuestas para la innovación. Adelante, Elena.
Muchas gracias, Brenda, y sin más preámbulo, bienvenidos sean todos también al lanzamiento del programa 5 propuestas para la innovación, mismo que se está desarrollando en un esfuerzo conjunto de la Red Liberal de América Latina, RELIAL, y de la Alianza para Centroamérica con el apoyo de la Fundación Friedrich Naumann. Y el invitado principal y de lujo de esta mañana es el periodista y escritor británico Matt Ridley. Y para dar un arranque oficial al evento, cedo la palabra a Bertha Pantoja, presidente de la Mesa Directiva de RELIAL, y a Elizabeth Meigler, directora de proyectos para Centroamérica de la Fundación Friedrich Naumann.
Muchas gracias, Elena. Los eventos recientes nos han confirmado que es mediante el ingenio humano, mediante la innovación, que podemos vencer los grandes problemas que se nos presentan. La innovación es la forma en que la humanidad puede modificar las condiciones en las que vive. Es desde donde podemos crear nuevos medicamentos como las vacunas que nos permitan vivir mejor y por más tiempo. Es la forma en que podemos tener nueva maquinaria que nos ayude a hacer de forma más fácil las tareas más complejas, nuevos materiales, energías que nos permitan conservar y aprovechar de mejor forma los recursos que nos da la tierra. La innovación, sin embargo, requiere que se permita a las personas pensar, actuar, arriesgarse y sobre todo emprender libremente. La valentía de los que se atreven a innovar no debe ser limitada por quienes buscan controlar el presente y aferrirse al pasado. Es por eso que los liberales apostamos por la innovación. Y no hay mejor forma de iniciar que con usted, doctor Ridley. Yo estoy muy emocionada de que podamos tenerlo con nosotros. Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Muy buenos días. En nombre de la Alianza para Centroamérica y la Fundación Friedrich Naumann, quiero darles la más cordial bienvenida. Es un gusto tener al señor Ridley con nosotros. Es un honor. Muchísimas gracias por aceptar esta invitación para compartir su amplio conocimiento en materia de innovación. La innovación y la creatividad individual son cruciales para lograr el desarrollo en distintos ámbitos de la política, de la sociedad, de nuestros países. Agradezco esta colaboración con RELIAL, en este segundo año ya organizando estas conferencias para la innovación, y sin más, pues les deseo una muy interesante sesión con el profesor Ridley.
Ahora, para dar paso al señor Ridley, tenemos a Silvia Mercado, coordinadora de RELIAL, quien hará la presentación para dar paso a la conversación. Pues, Silvia.
Muchas gracias, Elena, y muchas gracias a todos. Pues es un honor presentar a Matt Ridley. Reconoceremos al autor por sus obras. Escribió How Innovation Works, su libro más reciente, The Evolution of Everything, Rational Optimism, The Origins of Virtue, The Red Queen, entre otros. Matt Ridley es periodista y empresario británico. Recibió su licenciatura y un doctorado en filosofía de la Universidad de Oxford. Trabajó para The Economist durante 9 años como editor de ciencia, Fue corresponsal en Washington y editor en Estados Unidos antes de convertirse en conferencista y empresario independiente. Actualmente escribe la columna The Mind and Matter en The Wall Street Journal y regularmente para The Times. Matt Ridley es uno de los pensadores más influyentes de los últimos tiempos y es una gran alegría tenerlo en este evento. Muchísimas gracias y adelante, Matt.
Thank you very much indeed. And I hope you can hear me clearly. It's a real pleasure to join you today and to reach across the ocean thanks to innovation. It's innovation that makes it possible, of course, for us to have this extraordinary technology that enables us to talk to each other on the other side of the world. And it's an interesting thought that we had this technology for 4 or 5 years, but we didn't start really using it until the pandemic forced us to. And so that's one of the things that seems to drive innovation, is the change in the background that makes it necessary. But I don't think that's the main reason why we experience innovation. It's worth reflecting just how extraordinary the changes we have seen in the last 50 years or so are. In my lifetime, we have seen the average lifespan of the average person increase on the planet by 1/3. Child mortality decreased by 2/3. And income has roughly trebled in that time, 3 times as much income in real terms. Those changes came about because of innovation. And innovation is a phenomenon that we think we understand, but I argue in my latest book, I don't think we really do fully understand it, and we have to go back to basics and drill down into what makes it work. And the essential ingredient of innovation, I think, is freedom. I think it is absolutely vital to give people the liberty to explore, to experiment, to change their minds, to change direction, to invest their money, to express their wishes as a consumer if we are to get the benefits of innovation, because it's a surprisingly unpredictable process. Let me run through what I think are crucial features of innovation contrasted with the general view that many people have. First, it's not the same as invention. Coming up with a new device is only part of the story. You then have to make a new device reliable, reliable, available, and affordable for people. And that's a much harder job than we generally give credit for. So we worship the people who made the first steam engine or the first airplane, but we forget about all the people who developed it into something more reliable. Second, innovation is an incremental, gradual process. Once again, we look at inventions and we say there was a sudden moment when the light bulb was invented or the airplane was invented. But actually, there's a long process of build up to that. And then there's a long process of improvement after that. Thirdly, there is a lot of luck involved. There's a lot of serendipity. A lot of innovators start in one direction and then change direction and discover something they didn't expect to discover. So you have to build in to your system the capacity to catch bits of luck when they come along. Innovation is also a very evolutionary process. That is to say, it moves from one step to the next. If you look at Moore's law, the improvement in computing over 50 years, the fact that we knew it was going to improve didn't enable us to accelerate the improvement. It had to move through each stage to get to the next one. And there's another way in which innovation is like evolution, I think, and that is it often involves recombination. Taking two technologies and combining them in a new way is the main way in which we come up with new devices. And that's one of the reasons that you find innovation happening where people collaborate, where people exchange ideas. It happens where people have a chance to bring their ideas together. So one of the great features that you have to provide if you want innovation is a forum for people to share ideas, to put them together and to come up with new ideas. And one of the things you also have to allow for is trial and error. I found that when I was researching the history of innovation, again and again, great innovators would talk about the importance of trial and error, of making mistakes, of failing and starting again. Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, famously said, "I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work." And he did 6,000 different, he tried 6,000 different types of plant material before he settled upon Japanese bamboo for the filament of a light bulb. So that's a very nice example of how hard you have to work, how many times you have to try different things before you get to the result. And Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, has often emphasized the importance of failure. Fail again and again and again. Don't give up, keep trying. If you're not failing, you're not trying. And you can tell the history of Amazon as a series of failures. Amazon made many mistakes in its history. It went into the wrong sectors, it invested in the wrong kind of companies, it tried the wrong kind of materials, it made a lot of mistakes. But look at it now, it's the largest company in the world. Clearly, those mistakes didn't stop it in the end succeeding. There's a feature of innovation that I find particularly interesting and that I don't fully understand. And that is that it's inevitable, inexorable. And in looking backwards, it's predictable. And yet looking forwards, it's not predictable. What do I mean by that? Well, 21 different people invented the light bulb independently. There was Edison in America, there was Swan in England, there was Lodygin in Russia. It didn't matter whether these people lived or died, the light bulb would still have been invented in the 1870s. Because the idea of putting together electricity and vacuums and glass and all these things was so obvious by then that someone was bound to do it. The same way in the 1990s, the search engine was inevitable. It became very much obvious that people would invent search engines, that people would make a lot of money out of them, that Google or something like Google would emerge. You can't, once you've invented the internet, it becomes inevitable that the search engine will be invented. But nobody predicted it, or at least very few people did. In the 1980s, people are talking about the coming internet, and they are not talking about the importance of search. Even the founders of Google did not think they were inventing the search engine. They thought they were cataloging the internet. So there's a strange asymmetry about innovation. We think it looks obvious when we look backwards, but it doesn't look obvious at all when we look forwards. And one of the results of that is that we get the future very badly wrong. We often predict the next technology, and we're often wrong. In the 1950s, we thought the future would all be about improvements in transport, supersonic airplanes, routine space travel, personal jetpacks, all this kind of thing. Private helicopters attached to your back, that kind of thing. None of that happened. But we didn't see coming the great changes in computing and communication. And I think one of the reasons for this is a phenomenon identified by somebody called Roy Amara, which is what I call the hype cycle, that we underestimate the impact of a new technology in the long run, but we overestimate it in the short run. So we think that genomics is going to transform medicine in the year 2000, and it doesn't. But in the end, it does, and it will transform genomics. So there's a non-linear phenomenon here, which is very, very interesting. Now, I could talk a little bit longer about this, or I could start to take questions, whatever you wish. But let me just say 2 or 3 more things before I finish. Is that all right? The relationship between innovation and science is an intriguing one, because we think that we discover scientific principles and then we apply them in inventions, which then become innovations. I don't think that's quite how it works most of the time. Sometimes it works like that, but just as often we invent things that work, and we then have to go to science to explain how they work and why they work. So, for example, we invented vaccines 300 years ago. We didn't understand how they worked until 50 years ago. In fact, we probably still don't fully understand how vaccines work. We're still trying. The same is true of steam engines. We invented steam engines before we understood thermodynamics. And some of the new technologies that are very exciting today, like gene editing, owe quite a lot to accidental discoveries, for example, in the yogurt industry, before they were explored in academia. But the final theme I want to leave with you is that you do need freedom to have innovation. If you look at the history of big centralized empires, whether the Ming Empire in China or the Soviet Empire in Russia, they don't innovate because they don't have a mechanism for getting the wishes and the preferences of consumers fed back to the people who have the freedom to come up with new ideas. And the great innovations have tended to come from fragmented city-states, Renaissance Italy, ancient Greece, modern California, the city-states of San Jose and San Francisco are very like the city-states of Venice and Genoa and Florence and so on. So I think we need to learn the lesson that we want localized, democratic, free cities interacting with each other as the place where innovation will happen, and not big centralized empires. That's why I think the European Union has become bad at innovation, for example, because it has tried to impose the same rules in every part of the continent. And the great advantage of Europe in the old days over China was that it was fragmented and people moved around. So, to finish with the story of vaccines, a British woman went to Constantinople 300 years ago and came back with the idea that you should give a little bit of smallpox from someone who has recovered to a child to make it immune in the future. This was called variolation, later became inoculation, it later became vaccination. We don't know who invented it. And we know that the experts didn't bring it back. And we know that she was greatly criticized for bringing it back. Likewise, a slave brought it to North America as an idea. And then for hundreds of years, we gradually worked out that this was an incredibly effective way of preventing disease. We got to the point where we could extinguish smallpox altogether. An extraordinary human achievement, probably the greatest human achievement in terms of health that there ever was. And now, of course, we are confronted with a new pandemic. We didn't have good, fast ways of developing vaccines at the beginning of the pandemic. That's a mistake we should have had. It's possible to improve vaccine development much more than we have done. But we are now seeing a new technology come forward, the technology of programmable messenger RNA vaccines of the kind that Moderna and BioNTech have developed, which I think will transform the treatment of disease, not just infectious disease, but cancer as well. And again, it is a woman who deserves most of the credit here. Katalin Karikó, a Hungarian immigrant to the United States, worked on this technology for a very long time, for 20 years, and failed. She failed again and again and again. She lost her grant, she got demoted, she was told she was going nowhere, and then finally, with the help of Drew Weissman, she had a breakthrough, tried pseudouridine instead of uridine, and it began to work. And now I think we have, as a result of that, a technology that will not only stop this pandemic, but it will also, hopefully, give us a way of curing cancer and allergies and many other illnesses. So that is the goal, that is the prize that innovation can bring. And we need to design our societies around the encouragement of innovation rather than all too often letting vested interests raise barriers against innovation. I'll stop there because I want to leave a little time to take questions or to have a conversation with anybody about this. Is that what you wanted to hear at this stage, or is there anything else you'd like to hear about?
Buenos días, Dr. Riley. Un gusto que me toque a mí el privilegio de conversar con usted en este momento. Quiero plantear dos ideas en relación a lo último que usted planteó. Hay resistencia frente a la innovación, ¿verdad? ¿Cuál es el rol de los sistemas educativos, de los sistemas políticos? Porque usted bien lo plantea en términos de que es un poco predecible, pero también impredecible. Yo recuerdo que de pequeña vi una serie que se llama Los Supersónicos, donde todo el mundo volaba y la tecnología y habían teléfonos digitales extraordinarios y mis padres me decían, a eso vamos a llegar. O sea, sí había visión de que íbamos a llegar a algo que en ese momento parecía ficción. Pero lo cierto es que entonces hay cierta, en el medio, hay condiciones que muestran que vamos a cambiar en alguna dirección. Julio Verne nos vio visitando el centro de la Tierra y dándole la vuelta al mundo en 80 días, ¿verdad? O sea, sí hay señales en el entorno. Pero ¿por qué cuesta tanto? ¿Por qué cuesta tanto cuando ya se habla de fomentar esa innovación, como dijo usted, y hablamos entonces de sistemas políticos y educativos? ¿Por qué ahí lo que hay son frenos y barreras? Hay temor a que de alguna manera la innovación en medio de condiciones de libertad total provoquen pérdida de control de parte de algunos actores en este mundo. ¿Qué le parece?
I think that resistance to innovation is a hugely important problem and one that we need to tackle much more energetically. And it comes from, it's very common. In my book, I describe how even coffee met huge resistance when it arrived as an innovation in the 1500s. It was banned almost everywhere. Unsuccessfully, coffee was too delicious to succeed in being banned for very long. But again and again, a ruler or a king would say, this new drink must not be allowed. Now, why did they say that? Because it's quite a good way of getting at, it seems ridiculous to us now that you would ban coffee. And the ban usually came from two directions. One, it came because the rival industries wanted had vested interests and they wanted it stopped. So the beer and wine industry in France mobilized very strongly to have coffee banned on the grounds that it might be bad for you, on the precautionary grounds that this might dry up your kidneys and destroy your liver. It was bad medical science, but it was promulgated. So look out for the vested interests that do not want innovation to disrupt their cozy monopolies and their income streams. That's one lesson. The other reason why coffee was banned is because wherever it came, there were coffee houses. And coffee houses were full of conversation. And when people have conversations, they sometimes talk about whether or not the king or the ruler is doing a good job. And sometimes they conclude that he's not doing a good job, and they say so in their conversations. And some of the rulers are very explicit about this. King Charles II in England banned coffee houses because he said people are spreading fake news about me in them, and I don't like that. So innovation is disruptive, it's subversive, it's dangerous, as seen by the people who run society. Now, there's a third reason today why people resist innovation, and that is because it has become very profitable to fan the flames of fear about the new. We saw this with genetically modified crops in Europe. A lot of money was made by pressure groups saying these new technologies might be bad for you, and because we don't know, we therefore should make it impossible to have them develop. So for me, those are the opposition to innovation comes from rival businesses, from governments that don't like to see change because it's threatening, and from a general fear of the unknown that we have. So those, I think, are the main factors that we have to tackle, and we have to somehow turn around the equation so that people understand the unseen benefits that they might get from innovation, as well as the potential drawbacks.
Muchas gracias, doctor Ridley. En el tema de la educación, me gustaría que nos ilustrara sobre cómo podemos impulsar cambios para que nuestros sistemas educativos, que son estandarizados, rígidos, puedan incorporar dentro de los procesos formativos este fomento a la innovación, estas formas distintas de trabajar con los niños y jóvenes para lograr de verdad que se incorporen a este mundo aportando con nuevas ideas y nuevos conceptos para poder avanzar más rápidamente.
The short answer is I don't know. I'm not an expert on education. I'm not an educator, and I hesitate to teach people who know better than me how to do it. But I do worry that we take innovation for granted in society, and we don't tell children about it nearly enough. When I was young, I was taught about the great engineers, the great inventors, the people who invented printing and steam engines and computers and everything. I don't think that happens in schools anymore. I don't think we give as much credit. We tell as many stories. And one of the things I tried to do in this book is tell a lot of stories about how innovations came about, to bring out these themes. And they're wonderful stories. I mean, the story of the Wright brothers and of their rival who was funded by the government and yet made a mistake because he didn't listen to anyone else. He thought he was too clever. Samuel Langley, you know, that's a fantastic story. These are the stories we need to be telling kids. Kids love stories, and the stories of successful innovations and how they came about are really fantastic stories. So I would tell more stories. The other thing I would do is I would try and get across to children and students that innovation is done by ordinary people. At the moment, I think we talk about it in a way that makes it sound like you need to be a special person to cause innovation. You need to have something called creativity. And creativity is like special blood in your veins that you either have or you don't. And we reinforce the message that these are people who are really special. But when you examine it, when you look at what Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs or you know, the people who invented the Wright brothers, for example, what they had was hard work, trial and error, failing often, trying again, being open to new ideas and changing direction. Now, any of us do that. So I love the thought of trying to get across to kids that innovation is a collective process that everybody gets involved in. Ordinary people contribute to it. You don't have to be a special person. You just have to be very open-minded and keep trying. And that's what I would say if I was standing in front of a class of kids and trying to enthuse them about innovation.
Muchísimas gracias. Vamos a proceder con las preguntas que tenemos en el espacio para preguntas y respuestas. Un comentario de Ricardo Sierra, agradeciendo a don Matt el privilegio de poder estar aquí escuchándolo. Luego tenemos a Franco López, que lo que nos dice es, Franco es de Argentina, y la pregunta, doctor Ridley, es, ¿cuál cree que es la importancia de la existencia de una frontera, ¿verdad?, sea geográfica o digital, alrededor de esta civilización a la que la gente podría escapar de las sociedades reguladoras para experimentar libremente?
Well, the traditional view is that the less borders we have, the better, because then ideas can move, people can move, and there is free exchange of ideas. But the very large units with no borders in them are often called empires, if you like China for much of its period, or Europe as the European Union. And the Ottoman Empire was a huge area. And these weren't very good at innovation. Innovation was better in places like Northern Italy 500 years ago, or the Netherlands, which actually were quite small units. And that intrigues me. And I think what it's telling us is that you need different approaches. You need variety. You need different regimes, different tax regimes, different policy regimes, different regulatory patterns, so as to have lots of experiments in how to encourage innovation. Now, that doesn't mean that I want to fragment the world into a million different tiny countries, because I think that would be a great pity. We do want the free trade and exchange of ideas. The best places have always been trading places. Places like Amsterdam or San Francisco or Shanghai, places where people do move in and move out. In that sense, you don't want a border, but you also want differentiation. One thing that happened in Europe over many centuries was that inventors moved. They moved from one country to another country because they didn't like the regime and they thought they would be treated better in another regime. And that, I think, is a crucial ability that one needs to retain. So America, of course, gets for much of the 20th century, America gets it exactly right, because what America does is it creates an enormous empire, but fragments it into different states with different policies. And I think that's crucial. Some of the rules that California passed about share ownership structure and taxation and intellectual property were sufficiently different from other states as to encourage entrepreneurs to move there. And now California is doing rather badly in that respect, and Texas is doing much better and attracting people back from California. So I love the federal system that America had. I think it's less federal now, actually. I think it's much more unitary in America, and I think that will be a pity.
Muchas gracias, doctor. Dice Solimar Herrera que ¿cómo podría afectar a la innovación un marco jurídico rígido? ¿Cómo se puede trabajar en ese sentido con esos marcos rígidos jurídicos y a la vez impulsar los procesos de innovación?
Well, the rule of law is obviously important to innovators as to all entrepreneurs, but I am generally skeptical about the role of the law in encouraging innovation. That what the law must do is be permissive rather than sort of set out how you do innovation. I think, for example, that intellectual property law is over restrictive now. I think a lot of what we do in the way of patenting and copyright is actually a hindrance to innovation rather than a help to innovation. If you look at the history, the very recent history of CRISPR, the gene editing technology that's very exciting at the moment, as soon as these people in Berkeley and Boston and other places started developing this technology, they nearly all began patenting it. And as a result, they kept it. They didn't tell each other what they were up to, and they got into arguments in law courts. terrible waste of time. I would like to see much less emphasis on patents and copyrights. I don't think they encourage innovation nearly as much as we think. I think, you know, there are whole industries like the software industry where patents don't matter very much, where the secret is to be ahead of the game, to be the first into a new technology and not to employ too many lawyers and give them very large salaries like they like to have.
Muchas gracias. Continuamos entonces con las preguntas. Tenemos esta de parte de don Marco Martínez, que lo que nos pregunta es, ¿qué hace que algunos países sean más propicios para la innovación positiva? ¿Qué hace que algunas ciudades también sean más propicias para esto? Y entonces, ¿qué deberíamos promover a nivel local para lograr la innovación?
The one-word answer is freedom. I want to tell you a little story about ancient China. About 1,000 years ago in China, there was an empire, a dynasty called the Song dynasty, which was about 1000 AD. And it was a time of great innovation in China. This was when they invented the compass, the printing press, gunpowder, paper money, lots of different new technologies were developed during this period. China was undoubtedly the most inventive part of the world at that time. There was then the Mongol invasion and a brief Mongol dynasty, and then there was the Ming dynasty. And the Ming dynasty was totally uninventive. Nothing new came out of China for several hundred years. And the living standard of Chinese went down and down and down relative to the rest of the world. What's the difference between the Song and the Ming? Well, I think if you read up what the Song dynasty was like and what the Ming dynasty was like, the Song dynasty was very decentralized, was very liberal. On the whole, each city ran its own affairs. The emperor didn't tell people what to do. So merchants could invest, could be entrepreneurs, could be innovators, could trade, both with the rest of the world and within China. And it was very decentralized down to the local level. The Ming dynasty was very centralized. A merchant had to report to a mandarin in the capital exactly how much he had in his warehouse every month. He had to get a permit to leave his hometown. He wasn't allowed to trade overseas at all. That was what the Ming dynasty was like. It was very centralized. The Song dynasty was very decentralized. So that seems to me to be the obvious lesson here, is that if you want innovation, you need to delegate power and responsibility to the local level. Now, if you look at China recently, it became a very innovative country starting in about 1980. And it did so by essentially deregulating the economy. It's not a free place politically at all, but it has been quite a free place economically. If you were an entrepreneur, you faced very few of the bureaucratic rules and regulations that you would face in the West if you started a business or invented a new device. That is changing. China is now under Xi Jinping. It's going through the same transition from the Song to the Ming that it did 500 years ago. And therefore, I think China won't be so innovative in the future. So some country somewhere is going to get the idea of freeing entrepreneurs to try things, to experiment with technologies at a local level, and we'll get great rewards in the next 50 years. I don't know who it's going to be. It might be India, might be Latin America. Those are very good candidates. I don't think it's going to be Europe. I don't think it's going to be America. So here's a chance for Latin America. I think it's a really good opportunity, actually. Be the China of the next 50 years.
Muchas gracias, doctor. Una pregunta desde Argentina con nuestro compañero don Agustín Etzebarne. Dice Agustín, primero que nada, se lo tengo que decir porque es un gran admirador suyo y él lo pone aquí, gracias por la conferencia y quiere que le planteemos claramente que es un gran admirador. Bueno, dice Agustín que le gustaría que usted comentara su opinión sobre la inteligencia artificial, las redes neuronales, el aprendizaje profundo, o sea, los aspectos positivos de esto, pero también si hay riesgos para la libertad, doctor Ridley.
Yeah, it's a good question. Before I start on that, I just want to say about Argentina, I'm very interested in the way Argentina is liberating gene editing in agriculture in particular, because I think there is every evidence that that is producing much more. It means that agricultural innovation is no longer the province of big companies. Argentina is showing that it's now small research institutes, small companies that are innovating in that area. So that's a really good example of what I've just been talking about. Now, about AI, I'm very uncertain as to how AI is going to develop. On the one hand, I think it's already transforming our lives. GPS that tells me how long my journey is going to take and how to get there and avoid an obstacle. That is AI, isn't it? I mean, as soon as something becomes routine, we stop calling it AI. But I think we've already got all sorts of artificial intelligence that's helping us. But predictions about intelligent machines have been around all my life, and they've mostly been wrong. Predictions about human-like machines, particularly, tend never to come about. And I think I'm therefore cautious about expecting the deep AI that involves a robot that thinks. I don't think machines are ever going to be like us. I think AI is going to be very good at certain tasks, but not at the sort of same kind of things that we do. And I think it's going to augment human capacities more than to replace them. I don't think this is a question of making us redundant and the machines taking over. And I also don't think it's going to be malevolent. I'm relatively relaxed about the phenomenon of malicious robots deciding that we are inefficient creatures and we must be got rid of, like happens in so many sci-fi movies. 2001: A Space Odyssey, the film in which HAL rebels against human beings, is more than 50 years old now. And we're already 20 years past the year 2001, and we're not seeing any sign of that. I think we would have to build malevolence into machines. I don't think they would learn it from scratch. But I am very excited about one thing that has changed, which is that AI now relies on just extracting information from data without being told the rules of the game. And that's a big change from previous generations of artificial intelligence, that you don't have to teach it the rules of chess or Go or any of these games. Likewise, you don't have to teach it how society works. We don't know how society works. We can't teach it how, but it will figure these kind of things out. That's what's so exciting about these deep learning algorithms. And it'll be very interesting to see how far they take us. But a word of caution, I don't think we're going to see the dramatic changes that some people expect. Self-driving cars, I think, are further away than we think, at least except in certain prescribed conditions. So I think AI will come, but will change our world, but I don't think it'll change it quite as drastically as we sometimes think.
Muchas gracias. Seguimos con una pregunta de Franco López. Y doctor Ridley, estoy tratando de abarcar todas las preguntas porque todos los que estamos aquí somos admiradores suyos. Entonces, todos quieren que la pregunta que hizo exactamente la planteemos para que escuchar su respuesta. Entonces, le planteo la de Franco.
Okay, I'll be quicker in my answer.
Okay. Está bien. Pensando fuera de la caja, dice, ¿podría Marte eventualmente convertirse en un centro de innovación lejos de los estados terrestres reguladores? ¿Verdad? ¿Podría la dark web o la red alternativa de internet gratuita, respaldada por tecnología como criptografía o Starlink, funcionar de manera similar como un espacio libre para la innovación? Y le mandan saludos desde la Fundación Internacional Bases.
I think it will be a long time before Mars has the freedom and the critical mass of population to contribute. So even if we do get a few people to Mars, I think they will be like sending a few people to a small island somewhere. They won't contribute very much to innovation. Obviously, being on Mars will enable different things to be done. But I think on the whole, trying to survive in a hostile environment is not a good start when you're trying to be innovative. I'm sure you would need innovation on Mars, but I don't think that it will necessarily be useful for back home on Earth. Where I think you are right is that, you know, we can innovate in the cloud. We can use blockchain and these technologies to escape from needing to be in one place.
Bien, vamos a ver tres preguntas que están ligadas con el tema de qué hacer en los países en desarrollo, ¿verdad? Ya vimos el tema de que hay países o sociedades culturas más innovadoras que otras y que influye la educación, evidentemente, usted lo mencionaba, pero nos preguntan aquí que si ciertamente hay países que tienen mayores desafíos, los países en vías de desarrollo en relación a la innovación. Y por otro lado, otro de los participantes dice que la investigación y el desarrollo se están volviendo demasiado costosos. ¿Cómo hacerlo en países pobres? Entonces, es esa mezcla de dos preguntas, doctor. Los retos que tenemos en América Latina, pero los retos también en otros países, en otros continentes, donde la pobreza es la tónica y la inversión en innovación demanda recursos económicos.
Well, I would say that the lesson of the last 20 years, particularly, is that research and development is not necessarily very expensive. Many of the great tech businesses that have transformed our world needed very little capital to get started. Think of Google or Facebook. They needed a garage and a couple of computers and some access to the internet. And if you look at, so there is no reason they couldn't have happened in Africa or Latin America. And indeed, similar things have happened in those continents. Look at M-Pesa, the digital money development in East Africa. That's a very good example of a technology arising in a developing country that leapfrogs what is available in rich countries. And to some extent, that leapfrogging is the opportunity. Countries that don't have a big investment in fixed landlines can go mobile, that don't have existing big industries can leap into new ones. So I think 10 years ago, there were a lot of people who saying Africa can never experience economic growth. It's too poor. It's never going to be anything other than very poor. That's not true anymore. Africa is seeing spectacular economic growth. It's seeing innovation. It's seeing changes of the kind that happened in Asia a generation ago. Latin America, likewise. The continents that are struggling to see innovation and growth are continents like Europe, the wealthiest continents. So I don't think that there is a great disadvantage now for developing nations, like there probably was in the heavy industry phase of human history.
Gracias. Dice don José Hernández que Steven Pinker ha hablado de una progresfobia, incluso entre las personas progresistas del mundo. Si usted está de acuerdo con eso y cómo poder abordarlo.
Yes, I do agree. I mean, Steve is often right about a lot of things, but particularly about this, that there is an extraordinary reluctance to believe that the world is getting better. My book, The Rational Optimist, was about how the world is improving and why. And it was amazing, the reluctance of people to give up their pessimism. The best way of illustrating this is a brilliant experiment that Hans Rosling did when he asked people, has the percentage of the world population that lives in extreme poverty doubled, halved, or stayed the same in the last 20 years? And 65% thought it had doubled, that there are twice as high a proportion of the world population lives in extreme poverty today as 20 years ago. Only 5% thought it had halved. The 5% are right, the 65% are wrong. And it's worse than that, because Rosling said, if I wrote those three answers on 3 bananas and threw them into a cage with a chimpanzee in it, the chimpanzee would pick up the right answer 33% of the time, not 5% of the time. It would do 6 times as well as human beings in answering a question about human progress. We have enormous inbuilt bias towards pessimism in the way we report things, in the way we think about the world. And as a result, we underestimate the opportunities for progress in this world. And I think it's a huge shame. And I feel evangelical about it. I want to change the world in that respect, to get people to think about the possibilities that exist.
Gracias, doctor. Vamos ya terminando con las 2 últimas preguntas, y una es casi que del inicio de la presentación. Dice Adriana Grimaldo que cómo definir el término innovación. ¿Qué es innovación?
Yeah, my definition of innovation is coming up with a new device or a new habit that is reliable, affordable, and available to people, and that does something useful. And so I'm really emphasizing the practicality of innovations. It's not about inventing some brilliant but abstruse thing that is not reliable. That's an invention. To turn that invention into something people can actually use, you've got to make it reliable and affordable. And that's quite hard work. So that's the emphasis I like to put there.
Gracias. Y Ricardo Sierra, hay tres comentarios más. Una opinión que pide Ricardo sobre la innovación y la necesidad de resolver los riesgos del cambio climático, ¿verdad? ¿Será que nos referimos a su maravilloso libro El optimista racional? Entonces, ese tema del cambio climático. Luego Martelena Valencia nos dice que lo que estamos viviendo con las vacunas es un ejemplo, porque se logra en China o Rusia, se puede mejorar en Cuba o en cualquier país, y le ganaron tiempo a otros procesos de vacunación. Y el último comentario de Rodolfo Distel dice, estimado doctor, ¿cuáles son los riesgos de la innovación en la parte genética para el futuro de la libertad? Y con eso, doctor, estos 3 colegas, con estas 3 preguntas de 3 colegas, estaríamos cerrando ese ciclo de preguntas de los participantes.
Right. Well, there's a lot of different issues in there. As far as climate change is concerned, I think technological innovation is the solution that we will find. I don't think we will solve this by telling ourselves to use less material or fly less. But notice that we have greatly reduced, we greatly increased the efficiency of our energy technologies, our transport technologies over time. And as long as we allow our energy technologies to evolve towards more efficient forms, and we haven't allowed nuclear power, for example, to evolve, to innovate. We've cut it off from innovation by regulating it in a very difficult way. Then I think we can solve the climate problem during this century. I'm sure we're going to solve it with technology and not with regulation. As for Russia and China and centralized communist countries are sometimes quite good at pushing technologies through faster to get them approved, but they very rarely do so with as good a track record. And I would be very wary of the Chinese vaccines, which don't seem to me to have published good information about their clinical trials before being and their effectiveness before being put into circulation. So on the whole, I don't trust the Russian and Chinese vaccines as much as other ones. But of course, it's possible that they might have come up with good ones. And then the effect of genetics on freedom, I don't really see a problem here. I think genetic technologies will enable us to cure diseases. I don't think they will enable us to change human nature. It's going to be incredibly difficult to safely alter the intelligence or the sporting ability of children and things like that. And actually, I think these are the more genetic knowledge we have, the more we can recognize individuals and their differences, and the less we have to do things in the same way for everybody. So I see genetic knowledge as generally very liberating.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor Ridley. Le doy el paso a mis compañeras. Estoy segura que todos los participantes que pudieron escuchar la respuesta a sus preguntas deben sentirse felices de haber tenido el privilegio de esta interacción con usted. Muchísimas gracias, doctor.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, doctor Ridley, Marielo, por esta súper interesante conversación, por todas las enseñanzas de manera tan práctica y tan claras que hemos tenido ahorita. Y como no tenemos todavía suficiente, vamos a dar paso a Siggy Herzog, que es director regional para América Latina de la Fundación Friedrich Naumann para la Libertad, quien nos dará los puntos destacados de esta presentación que acabamos de escuchar. Bienvenido, Siggy.
Thank you very much, Elena, and thank you very much, Dr. Ridley, for an absolutely fascinating hour, and fascinating, inspiring, and enlightening. I'm not going to try to summarize your talk, but I would like to basically look at let's say 4 key takeaways that I take away from it, and that are, I think, important also for our work here in Latin America with a network of liberals in Latin America. I think one, the first takeaway that I took, and that reminded me also of the work of the Black Swan, is the unpredictability of innovation, the unpredictability of the future, and that we humans err gravely in thinking that we can predict the future. I think you've made some very powerful arguments and gave us some very powerful examples to remind us of that innovation only seems logical in retrospect, not in looking forward, and that the future is really open. The second key point for me was really the need for individual freedom, for people to be able to exchange ideas, and also the freedom to try and fail, the freedom to take risks, and not to be stigmatized for risks, and for society also to accept that risks and failures are part of progress, that we cannot build systems that try to eliminate all risks. And I think that's at the moment the social danger we see, especially in Europe. I think the way we deal with the pandemic has brought out that problem, that we have become too paranoid about risks and are not willing to allow trial and error. The third point that touched me was really don't stifle innovation with too much regulation. There's one point of discussion, I think, also for liberals, when you pointed out that we should take a critical look at intellectual property right laws. I fully agree with that. I think it's been a very dangerous development, as you said, driven by lawyers. And in the end, we have to recognize intellectual property right laws are establishing monopolies, and liberals should always be very wary of monopolies. Exactly. That a part of even the libertarian movement is so enamored of them is something that gives me great concern and then, intellectual headache. But it also, in the political field, means we should allow as much experimentation in decentralized units as possible. You mentioned the city-states. I come from the south of Germany, from a former free imperial city. And indeed, that area of Germany is still littered with world market leaders basically in every village. So the benefits of decentralization, of federalism, of local experimentation, that's something that speaks to my heart and my own experience. And it is on the larger scale, I think it is something that we need to take also a bit of heart in that at the moment, a lot of people are enamored with China and the seeming strength and even seeming innovativeness of China. I think China is now benefiting from the leftover effects of the opening, the path that Xi Jinping is taking with extreme repression and extreme control. I think this is going to lead to a bad future for China in many directions. But this is something that I think we have to take away from Latin America, that this is an opportunity for Latin America, but that Latin America needs to work on allowing more open systems, allowing more decentralized experimentation. Countries like Argentina or Mexico or Brazil that are federal in structure, that have some building blocks in place, I think need to take a harder look at how that can be made more productive. And last but not least, why should we do that? You mentioned the leapfrogging effect. This is really an opportunity to take the region, our countries, our societies forward in a big step, where we do not need to fear that we are always behind other regions, but on the contrary, that there are great opportunities. I think this is the challenge for us liberals, to really spread that message. There are great opportunities in allowing more innovation, and countries that are still struggling with poverty, with restrictions, should be the ones who allow more innovation and more experimentation. So thank you very much. Those are the things, I think, the points I took away for me personally and for our work in this region. Thank you again for bringing us this message.
Thank you, Siegfried. I think that was an incredibly good summary.
Thank you. Thanks.
I thought that was well, that was a wonderful summary of some excellent points. You did it much better than I did.
Well, I've been following some of these thoughts and some of your writing from the time when you wrote for The Economist. So it speaks to me. I would like to thank RELIAL for this wonderful opportunity, for the team of RELIAL, from the board, to Bertha, to Elena and Marielos, and also to Sylvia and Brenda, who made this technically possible, and to my colleague Elisabeth. So thanks very much, and I hope to see you again at least virtually in Latin America.
I hope to see you really, and then we can have a cerveza.
Yes, definitely. Or Mexican wine, which is getting better and better by the year.
Oh, even better, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Siggy. Y para finalizar este programa, el por qué estamos aquí con un referente de la innovación como el Dr. Ridley, es porque estamos lanzando el programa de 5 propuestas para la innovación. de la mano de RELIAL y la Alianza para Centroamérica, y es que en el 2020 nos vimos sorprendidos por el cambio súbito que tuvo nuestra realidad por la situación sanitaria que afecta al mundo, y desde RELIAL y la Alianza para Centroamérica se considera que el desarrollo no puede esperar más, y por eso en el 2021 se estarán desarrollando el programa de 5 propuestas que en su nombre se define a sí mismo, y serán 5 conferencias de alta talla con referentes en temas de derechos humanos y libertades civiles, educación, medio ambiente y smart cities, apertura de nuevos negocios y digitalización de procesos administrativos y protección de datos. Más que 5 conferencias, es denominado un programa porque va a ser un programa vivo con el empuje y participación de la comunidad, con la que en conjunto se concretarán estas 5 propuestas que empuje el desarrollo para América Latina en un momento que es tan urgente y prioritario. Están todos invitados, van a hacer conferencias a lo largo del año, van a estar siendo avisados para que se puedan unir y puedan participar y puedan proponer también, no solamente que puedan escuchar, sino ser parte de. Y antes de terminar, agradecer a Caminos de la Libertad por tan importante apoyo también para que este espacio fuera posible. Así que sin más, me despido, agradezco la atención de todos en Zoom, en redes sociales de RELIAL y la Alianza y las asociaciones miembros de ambas organizaciones. Así que me despido, muchas gracias al doctor Ridley nuevamente, a todos los que hicieron posible esto, así que tengan feliz resto de día.